So today I'm gonna be making a meta tier list, and here we've got just tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and not bad. You know, not bad is just anything below tier 3, and we're gonna start with tier 1. Now I strongly believe that there is only one deck that is worth being tier 1, and that is just Purrely. I mean, Purrely is just insane. It's definitely such an amazing deck. It has a lot of consistency. The Noir is amazing. I can't do anything. I can't even go to battle phase. It has a lot of tool to work with. It can barely brick or anything like that, and it just has crazy extender that you can play with. It's also really good in the grind game and the cycling resources. It's just a deck that deserves to be tier 1 here. Now, other than that, we have to just move to the tier 2, and I think that Labrynth is actually our first tier 2. Now, I am actually not that insane of a fan of Labrynth, but I gotta say, dude, the deck is insanely good in Master Duel, not gonna lie. The amount of consistency that this deck has, the amount of resource grinding that it has, getting access to any normal trap card, such an insane thing. D-Barrier is here, and it just has so much to go for, so much resources to recycle each turn, and it's just such an annoying and hard deck to beat. I mean, there's nothing really more to say about this deck. It's just a definitive good deck here. I also gotta point out that Dragon Link is an insanely good deck as well. I mean, it's definitely tier 2. I mean, listen, this deck has so much to go for. It has a ton of extenders. It has also the Bestials, which are pretty good against a lot of decks, and with the amount of different tools that it has access to, it's just such a great deck, and it has been definitely there for a while, you know. Ever since Master Duel came out, this deck was one of the better ones, and now for a couple of months has been staying between tier 1, tier 3 consistently. This is one of the most consistent options that you can go for sure. And for our last tier 2 deck, I'm gonna make a little bit of a wild prediction, and I gotta say that Vanquish Soul seems like one of those decks that definitely has potential. Now, the deck does rely on raising quite a bit, and there are some form of ways to search it out, of course. And in the TCG, this deck wasn't that insane, but in OCG it was a lot better, and one of the reasons is definitely Max C. And for Caesar, having access to a good Earth monster in hand allows him to just activate the effects, be a harder monster to deal with. You don't have to play any of the wacky hand traps and whatever. It also plays pretty well against Maxi. You can just pass turn with Raisin Dude, or you can just chain the heavy Borgar, space summon it, and then just pass turn and have a follow-up for next turn. Of course, the deck came out only a week ago, so I cannot say for sure it is a tier 2. At the moment, people kinda think it's a tier 3, but I will make a wilder prediction and say that this deck can perform pretty well. And moving on to the tier 3 options, and there are actually quite a bit of tier 3 decks, as you can see, and we're gonna start with the Spright now. Spright for me is just tier 3 deck. Of course, it is really great, and I do believe that the deck is quite capable of dealing with a lot of the other stuff, but Bestials are a little bit of a counter to this deck, and definitely people play Bestials. There's also the fact that a lot of these Spright cards are limited to some extent, you know, not that it hurts the deck insanely much, but not having access to totally awesome as well as having limited a lot of their cards makes the deck a little bit weaker, of course, and a good amount of their cards being light or dark is also not cool because of Bestials again. There's also the fact that Maxi is quite good against Spright. Although it's a great deck, it definitely has some small issues. And then at tier 3, I am gonna put the branded Despia. Now, of course, this deck has branded fusion at 1. I still don't get how this deck performs so well, even though their best card is limited to 1. The Bestials are good, of course, with Kashtira being weaker now. Bestials are getting a lot more popular again, and it's definitely a good option. There's also the fact that D-Barrier exists, and you know, Labrynth is just insanely good with the D-Barrier. The deck has some definitive weaknesses, and also cards that completely counter the deck, which is just two things that combined makes the deck a little bit worse. And another tier 3 deck, I gotta say, even though I hate to say it, dude, I hate Mikankos. I don't think that this deck deserves to be any good, but it is definitely performing a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't suggest you play it. I am no fan of this deck, but somehow it is capable of performing decently well. And the ability to also play those kaiju monsters, and you know, some other decks don't have the option to play that many non-engines, so they choose to play hand traps rather than stuff like kaijus. But this deck definitely plays a lot of them, which counters a Ice card, counters Purrely. It also counters a bunch of other things. The monsters are kind of annoying to deal with as well, and definitely has a place in the metagame. Now, I'm also gonna put at tier 3 Mathmech, and of course, this deck is definitely performing to a good level. The reason why I discussed this again is because of the new Farlow stuff that came out. I don't think that it makes the deck any better, if I'm being completely honest with you, because these cards don't really solve the problem that Mathmech has. You know, Mathmech is definitely capable of extending the plays to a big extent, is definitely capable of OTKing, which are just really good things. But to make one of the best boards possible, you definitely need to have a good opening hand. There's also the fact that the deck isn't really that amazing playing through Max C. You know, there's definitely ways to play through Max C and still build a board, but it's somewhat decent. It's not like amazing. It also has a huge weakness against the Bestials, which, you know, it's a big percentage of the format, of course. But I also want to point out that if you use Mathmech and also the Firelaws as an engine to a different deck, it actually performs pretty well. And I'm really hesitant to put Naturias at tier 3, but I I think that they might be somewhere in between not bad and just tier 3. It is definitely not a terrible deck, although I really don't see how this deck is that good, bro. I mean, listen, Naturia Beast, Naturia Barkian are two cool cards, but they're not particularly that amazing. Naturia Beast can counter Purrely, of course, which is definitely cool. There's also the fact that you can play a lot of non-engine stuff. People play Naturia Runicks, which is kind of a decent strategy. I don't like Runicks. I don't think that Runicks are particularly good now, but for sure there is a spot in the metagame for this deck to some extent. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think about this deck. I haven't tested it a ton as well, so I really cannot say whether or not I am sure about this pick, but I feel like this deck is definitely not terrible to play with. But that was it for the tier 1, 2 and 3. Now I'm gonna move to just straight up the other decks that are kinda good, and I'm gonna start with Swordsoul. Now there really isn't one straight up problem to why the deck isn't tier 3. It's just that even though the deck hasn't been hit that much, even though you do have the space to play a lot of cool hand traps and stuff like that, the main reason why I believe that this deck is not that amazing is straight up because it just got power crept, dude. The deck was definitely tier 2 at times, tier 3 at times, you know, going back and forth, but I feel like now is a good point to just remove it from the tier 3 list and just say that this deck is definitely a great option, but there are better ones in the metagame currently. And oh boy, we're gonna talk about the tiers here. Bro, I have no idea how they managed to make the deck weak without banning Kid Kalos, Rukalos, Kaleido Heart, or anything that insane. They eliminated so many cards from this deck. Hafnes, Sharian, the Field Spell, even Suliek, also banned Purrely, but somehow managed to not ban Kid Kalos and still make the deck worse. Now don't get me wrong, the deck does have a spot in the meta, it's just not that amazing anymore. And next up we've got the Exosisters, and oh boy, I love playing with this deck. This is one of my favorite decks to play in Master Duel. It's really sad to see the deck fall in popularity, and it was one of the best decks in Master Duel at some point as well. But now I just don't feel it, bro. There are a lot of issues with the deck, there are a lot of small issues with the deck, and even though you have access to a lot of cool tools to work with, there's Deep Barrier in the metagame, there's also Maxi, One Ash Blossom can shut down your Martha and stop your play sometimes. There are just definitive weaknesses to this deck, and for that reason I think that it deserves the spot that it gets now. And next one is Floowandereeze. Dude, I never liked this deck. I don't think that this deck is any fun to play with, it's any cool. I've never been a fan of it, and it's now not even great, so I'm very happy about it. There is a reason why you don't see the deck played, and it's just a terrible deck. Dude, guys, don't play this deck, please. It's not even that good, it's not even that fun. Just ignore that deck. I'm not a fan of it for sure. And for the next one, we've got the Runicks. Now, no matter how you play Runicks, even if you play it with the Sprites, even if you play it with Naturia, Runicks is Runicks to some extent. You can also play the Toxic version with Runicks, with there can be only one in the other Floodgates, and the deck was definitely good at some point, but now a lot of the Runick cards are limited, which makes the deck worse, of course, and it definitely doesn't deserve to be anything in between tier 1 to tier 3. Okay, next up we've got Scareclaw. This is another deck that I think it's just it's not that great, bro. I mean, back when Kashtiras were a little bit more popular, this deck had a spot in the metagame, but Tryhard is just not that amazing, bro. What can I say? Just not that good of a boss monster. There are also a lot of people playing the Kaijus versus Purrely versus a Rice card, and it's just not that amazing. Even as a boss monster, Tryhard is just not that good in general. I definitely don't think that this deck is that amazing right now. And oh boy, how the mighty have fallen. Dude, this deck, I just don't think it's any good now. A lot of people thought that this deck is gonna be amazing, but it just ended up not being that great in Master Duel. There are definitely ways to shut down this deck. Again, Deep Barrier, Maxi is also pretty problematic for the deck. And the moment that Kashtiras become heavily played, there's also the fact that you're gonna be playing stuff like Kurikara, stuff like the Kaijus, even stuff like the Book of Eclipse, which is also really good against Floowandereeze, and that's one of the reasons why Floowandereeze is not that amazing as well. So there are definitely a lot of tools to counter Kashtiras. Now you could also play Kashtiras as a small engine, but it really depends on what the small engine is. You could just play Fenrir, or you could just play like Fenrir plus Unicorn plus the Field Spell, only one copy of Theosis with maybe Rice card, maybe not, and it can be useful at times, but overall I don't think that Kashtiras are that amazing now. There are definitely better options to play. Maybe we could put them like tier 3, like low tier 3, maybe they're a little bit better than Naturias, but for now I'm gonna leave them here. I just don't see a reason to play that deck. But anyways, that was my tier list. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribe, it helps the channel a lot, and if you agree with it, let me know in the comments below. If you don't agree with any of the decisions that I made, let me know in the comments below as well. I would love to hear your opinion about the topic, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.